Welcome, everyone. I'm looking forward to our conversation tonight. Got some music to get us in the mood for the 70s.
Anybody name that tune?
I'm going to turn off the music now that we've got everybody in the mood.
Blackwater.
Well, hello and welcome. It's great to see so many wonderful people. We're so excited to start off this dialogue series, Circle Up.
Let me know if it's interesting. I'm going to be doing my...
This is the intro.
When I was thinking about a name for this, I went back and forth with several different things, and actually even went to there's a name generator for podcasts, and you put in different words. And so I was thinking of all our facilitation words and all kinds of different stuff. But AEE and facilitators around the world use circles a lot, whether we're talking about changing your perspective, or we're talking about getting a group together to talk, or whether we're talking about our globe. We use circles for a lot of things. So the name Circle Up really stuck with me. And so that's what I decided to call this series. And then I reached out to a lot of people and did a lot of research. I know that we haven't reached all of the folks that were involved in each of these decades. Some people weren't able to attend because of the time frame, and some people, have gone on. Some people have just weren't able to be contacted. I'm still looking for folks, so if you know people that we should be contacting to be part of this series, please let me know. But we have some really awesome and amazing people here tonight to chat with us about some of the things that were happening in AEE and in experiential education at its very beginning, at the inception. And so I am feeling very excited and honored. We've been chatting for about half an hour beforehand because I knew there'd be so many stories. We had to get some of it out before this hour. And I'm really excited to hear from all of our folks on the panel. And Rick, it's great to see you too. I'm gonna make sure that you're included in the panel. All of our panelists tonight have AE before their name. So just to help designate who's a panelist,
Sounds like they just got started.
who's not a panelist tonight. But it's an open conversation. We have some questions set up, and I will be calling on specific people throughout the event. But as we know as facilitators, sometimes the group leads the process and the event, and I am open to whatever needs to happen. So we're gonna get started with some introductions. I'm Sherry Bagley. I'm the Executive Director of AEE at the current time. I know we have a few other Executive Directors on here from the past, and that's really exciting, but I have the honor of being here for the last 2.5 years. And yeah, I'm really excited that this is our 50th conference coming up and that we can do this amazing event. And I'm just gonna call on people, if that's okay, on our panelists for the quickness of it. Dan, would you like to start us off?
Oh my God.
Oh, sorry.
Hello, everybody. I recognize a lot of your faces. Not really. The truth is I have had to go back and actually check them out. It's good to see you all. So as somebody who has had a hard time keeping jobs and also a hard time remembering, I jotted down some notes. I'll bet some of you did the same. I got started in this whole business well before I started Outward Bound in Marin County, California, where I taught for a long time as an environmental educator and found that that was a very satisfying thing, but it was missing the adventure element. Started in with Outward Bound and spent 11 years spread over 11 years working for Colorado Outward Bound and Southwest Outward Bound, where some of you that I see on the call, I recognize from there. And got involved with from Outward Bound in the new MED program that University of Colorado was doing. Ron, you and I think were in that beginning, that first class of people that came through. I think there were 11 of us. And we had, one of the things that was required of us was that we needed to do a project as a graduation exercise. And I started a thing called Brain Adventures and spent several years taking people from Marin County, primarily community college people, many of them older, which was a lot of fun and very interesting because in the 70s in Marin, the environment was hitting hard and it was just a great place to be. And it was about that time that I got involved with the AEE as it was going. In 1977, when I really dug in, we were signing our articles not confederation, articles of incorporation. Rick, I think you're on the call. I think Rick Medrick and I, who else? Ron, you as well. We were referencing earlier the nearly nude guys on the lawn. I think 3 or 4 of us from that picture are all here tonight. It was the year that we actually signed the articles, but we also founded a conference or started a conference and created a coordinating committee that set up 4 committees that I think several of them still exist. One was in writing the journal, another was in the jobs clearinghouse, another was in conferences, one that I chaired, and we had a big conference at Asilomar, California that particular year, and another one in finance. In 1984, I jumped into the Nature Conservancy, where I then spent the next 30 years working in Arizona, Bahamas, Jamaica, and Belize, and using experiential education as both a fundraising tool, but also as a way to get to know foreign nationals in conservation. And finally, I spent 11 years on the board of Prescott College, where I got to know Steve Pace, of course. Hi, Steve. And Dan Garvey, who we were talking about a little bit earlier. So that's it for me. Thanks all.
Thanks, Dan. I'm gonna hop to Bob.
Okay, thank you. Bob Macarthur is my name. Been in experiential education in one form or another since the late 60s. Got involved with AEE through my role as director of the Outward Bound Center at Dartmouth College, and served on, I think, the first or second elected board from 78 to 80, and served as president for a couple of years. Went on to work with the American Youth Foundation, overlapped with Jim Kielsmeyer in some programming in terms of leadership development of young people, and a broader sense of experiential education and service learning and some other aspects of it. And today, my wife and I continue to conduct our coaching business, working primarily with nonprofit executives and senior leadership teams and boards. And I've done some strategic planning with nonprofits. Living in New Hampshire and very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Simon?
Hi, my name is Simon Priest. I'm a recovering academic. I'm now retired, but still teaching and researching and serving. I've had about 5 decades in led outdoor learning. With AEE, I've been the steering committee member for conferences, speaker, presenter at conferences, on the editorial board for the journal, guest editor for the journal, authored several publications for AEE, chaired several task forces, mostly around safety, student grants, research and evaluation, sat on program accreditation, student scholarships, and the EBTD professional group leadership. And Dan Garvey made me international ambassador for a decade, where I expanded the membership outside the United States, and most recently was the editor of the Clearinghouse Information Project, which you should have gotten a message about in the last few days as it's now been released. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Simon. Gonna hop to Ron.
Thanks. Oops, something. Unmute myself. Is that working?
You're good.
Yes.
We can hear you.
All right, good. Well, I was one of the fortunate high school teachers that Joe Nold and Dick Kraft chose to nurture, and was part of that original MED program at the University of Colorado. Part of that coursework was an internship, and I landed a position in Washington, D.C., working for an organization called Ideas, headed by Murray Durst, who was the former head of the North Carolina Outward Bound School and executive director of Outward Bound National. And, I think as an outward bound person at the time, I think what Murray did more than anything else was really open my eyes, challenge me to think about experiential education more broadly, that it didn't have to occur in the out of doors. It didn't have to be coupled with Patagonia and Vibram Souls. I was lucky enough to be part of the first organizing committee before there was a real formal AEE. I guess, Rick, maybe you were the one that incorporated us, but I remember at the time we were just a very ad hoc group trying to figure out the next year's conference. I edited the first newsletter and journal. The Jobs Clearinghouse, I think, was at the time done by Maria Snyder. We lived in the basement of the Outward Bound School and used most of their resources. And so I would say I've been involved in some fashion in experiential learning ever since then. It's really informed the way in which I've worked in fields of organizational development, leadership development. And I'm now joyfully retired and spending most of my time on the pickleball court when I'm not fly fishing. Thanks.
Thanks, Ron. Dick?
Yeah, Dick Kraft. Several of the people who are with us today were people who got me into experiential ed. They were students of mine, and I was a traditional academic professor, and they came to me and suggested that there's a need for some faculty member to take over this program called experiential ed. And it had something to do with mountains and outward bound and rivers and hot tubbing in the desert and God knows what all. So anyway, I took the leap and began what's now 50 years, I guess, of some kind of involvement. As I say, I look back to students as the key in my experience, because almost everything I've learned from many of you who are here today, and I thank you for that. I'd like to do a shout out to Bert Horwood, who's going to come up later here, because Bert and I worked together on the design of an experience-based teacher education program. And one of my great hopes and one of my great regrets is that my own field of teacher education and my own field of curriculum development and all the rest has not experiential ed. We'd really hoped to have that as kind of the major accomplishment of where we would go. And we've made inroads, we've affected programs. We had an experiential ed program, and as I say, a teacher ed experiential ed program. A lot of that has disappeared. A lot of it, the hopes of changing the public schools of America along the lines of John Dewey was a great hope, but many of us entered retirement without having made any of those great kinds of things. One quick story as to where experiential ed was. I can still remember a panel at the Estes Park conference with a gentleman named Willie Unsold. And most of you know Willie is one of the great American mountaineers. And we had after Willie had showed off his toe in the bottle on the stand in front of us, we had the discussion. The question before us was, what should be given credit in experience? And the question was a woman's experience of giving birth is perhaps the most profound experience of any human being, should that be given academic credit at a university. So a bunch of old, young balding people at that point were waxing articulate and inarticulate on a question. Came to me today because this morning I was in a group and we spent the morning of men and women discussing the issues of abortion. And we promised not to get political, so I'm not going to get political here, except to say that I've never forgotten that session of what credit should be given for various kinds of experiences, because it's one of those issues that we've struggled with for at least 50 years, and I would guess would go on forever. Thank you.
Dick. Marianne?
Hi. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
I feel like I should go last because I'm like the tail end of the 70s. When I was talking to Sherry, I felt like for me, my most active years were probably the 80s and 90s. But so many of the people who are on this panel tonight were influencers that pulled me in. I was in mid 70s, fresh out of college, working in the social work psychology field, working with youth at risk, and in Connecticut in this juvenile correctional facility. And I was inspired by, there was John Flood, I think. He was at the Wilderness School in Goshen, Connecticut. And there was Mike Stratton, of course, at the Carroll School. So a lot of my work in the 70s was in the regional area in New England, which is where I used to live. I'm currently in Northern Virginia, just outside of DC. And so in the 70s, for me, I got really hyped up because I began to see that there was so much we could do with these youth at risk and the families. And it was not like anything that I'd studied in college. And it was like suddenly I had this vision of where I might take my career. And it has been my career for a very long time. So I stayed in Connecticut, worked with juveniles. We started a youth challenge program for incarcerated youth. We actually got to take them out in the woods and do all kinds of great stuff. And the program in the beginning, they all looked at me and said, this is never going to last. And it lasted 20 years. And the only reason it wasn't there anymore is they deinstitutionalized most of the students, and the whole political juvenile world had changed. Before any of that happened, I moved on to work in drug and alcohol. And we also started several programs in Connecticut around that. I worked a lot with Mike Gass, who I think is on here. I saw him. Brought them in. So a lot of regional stuff for me happened in the 70s and into the early 80s. My first actual conference was the one in Santa Fe. I think it was 1980. So I was right on the edge there. I went on to get very involved in AEE. I ran the conference in Moodus, Connecticut in 85. I was on the board for many years, was president for many years. So my commitment, I also worked very hard with Zeke Zelliff. We created the conference advisory committee. So actually, Sherry, I had found in looking for my materials, I got this great list that I should send you of all the conferences and all the details around those conferences. So for me, the work I've done since those early years, when I look back, I think there's someone from AEE involved in almost every phase of my career development. So when I look at some of the work I've gotten into, the connections are endless. I currently am very active with ETDA, Experiential Training and Development Alliance, which we grew out of AEE. So, I'm currently on that board right now. So my career when I moved to the DC area, I started my own company, and my work is completely experiential, mostly doing work in leadership and organizational development. So that's me.
Marianne? Jim?
Greetings. My experience actually started in the 60s, and perhaps Jed Williamson can relate to this. I think, Jed, you're a military veteran as well, aren't you? Is Jed still on? I'll go on with my story.
Yes.
Yes. That said, when I was initially a second lieutenant on the DMZ in Korea, I was confronted with an issue that involved the racism that was prevalent as American soldiers had interactions with Korean civilians. And part of the solution was very distant as far as the commanding officers of the 2nd Infantry were concerned. They just didn't know what to do. And I was a platoon leader and really did not like the Army. And even though I had been trained as a ranger and a paratrooper, I really did not like what the Army was about, and thought that there was another way of addressing the issue of racial tension between American GIs and Korean civilians. And so I got, in my barracks, there was the person I related to best was Lieutenant Chung Young Bok from the 27th Regimental Combat Team of the South Korean Army. And Chung and I talked about the fact that there was great tension between American soldiers and Korean civilians, and yet there was an element of goodwill that could be brought forward if we worked at it. So long story short, with Chung's support, we created an English language tutoring program where GI volunteers would work with Korean schools to teach English. All Korean schools at that time, especially the rural schools, were absent a trained English language person. And so they really did not have a lot of capacity there. So, and we had a zillion young GIs who hated the military and wanted to do something decent, who became our recruits. I walked into the my commanding officer's office and mentioned the program of introducing English language instructors in the form of GI volunteers in Korean schools. And he said, absolutely not. And so that was the beginning of my experience in pushing back against around issues that I felt were important. So Chung and I hatched a proposal. We sent it forward to the commanding general via the two one-star generals, and they sent it back and said, absolutely not, this is not going to work. It's not military. You won't be able to train the GIs, and they will not volunteer. Well, that just made me a little bit more irritated, and it sealed the deal as far as my career in the U.S. Army, as far as I was concerned. And so I developed a connection with the commanding general's aide and asked him if I could get an audience, as it were, with the two-star general, jumping over my boss who had put me down and said that it would never work. And so I walked into the, long story short, I walked into the office of the commanding general with fully prepared with all the high-tech equipment of the time. I had a map and a pointer, and sitting in the audience, ready to take me apart, were my two adversaries, the assistant division commanders who had blackballed my proposal. And I proceeded to hold forth. I was all of 21. And in the process, the two-star listened carefully and turned to me and said, okay, you go for it. And we answered the question of how we would train the GIs to teach English as a second language in Korean schools by recruiting the Peace Corps. And so the Peace Corps came to the 2nd Infantry Division as trainers. And then, as you might expect, the program was a very strong success. I tell this story because my career changed at that point from having been a student in the sciences to wanting to work across culture and wanted to work in experiential learning, because I saw how it could affect not only the GIs, but also the young Koreans that they worked with, as direct experience involved developing relationships and so on. So And so and then I was offered a job by the Boston firm that had pioneered this notion. Well, an MIT professor who said, why don't you come to DC and you can work as a graduate assistant with us at the American Institutes of Research. And you can, at the same time, study if you want to study something related to your new interest area. Well, I said, of course I'll do that. Then I had to find a map because I needed to find out where Washington, DC was. And I was out of the Midwest and did not understand where those things, how that worked in terms of, and I certainly didn't have a GPS, and I probably wouldn't even known what it was. So with my young family, we went to DC, and at the same time I was recruited by a close friend and colleague to come and work at the Colorado Outward Bound School because I had all the requisite training at the time that they thought they needed. A person who was trained as an airborne paratrooper and an Army Ranger, that should be enough to be able to operate in the mountains of Colorado. I got a call when I was in Colorado, and the call was at Lake City, and so it took me about a day and a half to go to via the resupply to get to a phone. And lo and behold, I was offered a job at a prep school in DC because they had heard about my interest in adventure-based experiential learning. And in turn, they had a slot opening up for me, they thought, at the school. That was St. Albans School in DC. Arriving in DC then, I got to know that there was a network of prep schools in the East that had some form of experiential learning. And this, I think, for me was the experience of networking and raising my own capacity as I developed more relationships with others. That said, then I worked at the school, at St. Albans School, which was one of the first of the prep schools. I remember talking to people in Outward Bound about what this was about, and they gave me some other examples, but it was a pretty limited experience base in the 60s at that point, as far as integrating experiential education, adventure-based, and service learning as a part of the curriculum. So we did it the best we could to network. Then I found a way to connect with others who were interested in this kind of work, and in fact, that was my inroad from into Outward Bound, and then eventually into AEE. And I remember the concept that learning is, you all can probably repeat this as well as I can. Learning is thinking about experience, and the whole thinking about experience portion of adventure-based experiential learning was not terribly well developed at the time, and so I was brought into this prep school environment, and we created a number of designs that led then to further success in other contexts.
I hate to cut you off. I'm so sorry.
I will. I'm done.
But we need to hear from Bert and Jed and Rick also. So
Okay.
We're gonna have time for more stories, and that it's amazing, and I so appreciate to hear your journey, because wow, that is way different than a lot of us, and so thank you for sharing. But I'm gonna switch to Bert, and then we'll come back around. Thanks so much.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. It was great to hear Jim's account of getting out of the Army alive. That's terrific, and with such positive learning and a gift of service at the very start of his young manhood. Great. I came to this thing kind of late, and it might just help to put a little mustard on the event by my telling you that Mrs. Horwood's little boy was born 90 years ago tomorrow.
Oh, my.
So here I am.
Wow, that's so happy birthday. That's
Thanks.
amazing.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, it is. So I'm astonished to tell you the honest truth. Anyway, I was at Queen's University as a curriculum instructor in life sciences generally, but in particular biology. And I had very close encounter with a really interesting guy named Bob Pay. His name is spelled Pieh, and I'm sure that many here will remember him. Bob had come from what was then the Minnesota Bound School to Queens in order to help the senior faculty with a brand new college of education for training, specifically for training teachers who were already had at least a bachelor's degree. So this is a post-baccalaureate teacher education program. And the senior faculty wanted to see if it was not possible to use the philosophy and the practices associated with Kurt Hahn in as the formative impulse for all the course offerings, the way the curriculum worked, the way the practicum worked, internships, all of that kind of thing, was to emulate in some kind of way what we thought Hahn might have done. So that's what got me into this thing. And in the 70s, at some point, which is not clear to me, in those early days of the formation of AEE, whether the corporation had actually been declared or not yet, I don't know. There was a conference at Queen's, which was absolutely stunning, and it hooked me into this enterprise in a totally different way. Uh, uh, Bob Pay had arranged for an English educator named Charity James to come and speak. She was one of the key speakers, and Charity James just blew everybody away. And it was typical of Bob that he should have brought a woman. Keith King was there, and many of you will remember Keith. Keith just hit me between the eyes by saying a few words at the banquet by way of appreciation for the food and the company. It was, what he said was free of any kind of dogma, but it was one of the most spiritual things that I had encountered in that place. We had Elliot Wigginton brought a couple of his kids from Foxfire and was sort of the equivalent to the Kurt Hahn address, I guess, but it was not called that at that time. So this conference was an outstanding thing, and it was in the early 70s, roughly around the time that AEE was getting started. It may have been the second or third conference. I'm not quite sure which. But I want to pick up the thread about having Hahn's influence reflect in our curriculum. We had a huge service learning component. Every would-be teacher had to undertake a service learning project in the community. There were huge options, interest courses. It was okay for an English specialist to take an elementary course in biology. We had all kinds of multiple courses of offerings called, oh dear, the name's gone. They were simple get to know the outdoors, overnights for all kinds of people who were going to be teacher who had never actually paddled a canoe or slept outside or done anything of the least adventurous component. So these were available as courses for credit in the program. Now, that was very exciting. It was associated with the rise and development of the Association for Experiential Education. And I soon became a member and started attending conferences, especially when my dean said, I need you to start a devoted program to outdoor and experiential education to increase our enrollment. Well, all of this was working very well. And then, boom, service learning was cut. We had a new dean. And his view of academe just could not accommodate the idea that people were going into the community and doing acts of service, like having friendly visits with drug addicts in the prison. Things like that have got nothing to do with teaching. No, keep them in the classroom was his motto. Service learning was gone. A lot of the field work was cut way back. And if you were to look at our teacher education program now, I don't think you would find anything recognizable of the influence of Kurt Hahn. So the sad news is that that particular poke at revising academe was a failure. And certainly over a 20-year period, it was a failure. On the other hand,
Bert, I'm so sorry.
okay,
I'm
what we
sorry.
got out of it is
I should have realized that when I asked people to summarize their experience, and you all have over 50 years of experience, many of you, that it was going to take quite a while. And I am sorry to cut you off. I apologize.
I've said everything that's important. Thank you.
Well, we have more questions. We definitely have more questions, but I just want to let Jed and Rick introduce themselves and tell us just a little bit about your role in AEE and where you are now, and that would be great. And again, this is our first one of these, so we're rolling with it, and it's awesome. And I see Tony Alvarez smiling, who is somebody who has gone over in his speeches before and knows how it goes. So, but. Bert, we're coming back to you. Thank you so much. Rick, I'm going to have you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Unmute, Rick.
Okay,
Mr. Educator, unmute.
I'm I'm getting there. It's great to see all these old faces who've had such a long history and added to, the whole character of what experiential education is. I guess I began that as an undergraduate at Dartmouth when I majored in philosophy and literature, but really spent most of my time outdoors and really majored in climbing and skiing. And after Dartmouth, I spent 4 or 5 years being a mountain guide and ski instructor until my wife decided this wasn't leading anywhere. And so we went to the Peace Corps in East Africa and, taught in secondary schools and did community development and stuff like that. At the end of that time, I wrote Outward Bound. Actually, Willie Unsold was advertising for Outward Bound. I wrote, Willie, what are you doing with this paramilitary organization? And he wrote back a letter that said, there are 4 stages in life ways. And, the first is the apprentice. The second is when you begin to realize you can get paid for what you're doing. The third is when you teach others. And he never defined the fourth, which was in Hindu mythology, a spiritual stage where you go out and wander around, which is basically what I've done most of my life. I worked for Outward Bound for 5 years and left Outward Bound, started my own outdoor organization to train outdoor leaders, and then decided that a lot of us decided that we needed to get doctorates to have credibility in the academic world. And so I got my EDD in humanistic psychology and experiential education. And, you know, that's when AEE took birth with, you know, people like Dan Campbell and Ron Gager. And we went on from there and created this organization, which most of us have been involved with for the last 50 years, which is really amazing. And during that period of time, running my own organization, I got drafted to be the adventure education coordinator for the master's program in adventure education at Prescott College. And then I got drafted until developing a PhD program in sustainability education. And I've dealt with that for the last 20 years and also keep running outdoor courses and realize that this is the stage 4 that Willie was talking about. And I'm very happy with the experiences I've had, the people I've worked with over the ages. You're all wonderful educators, and I just love hearing your stories. Thanks.
Thanks, Rick. Jed?
Oh, yeah, well, first of all, thanks to all of you, most of you who are on the screen, because you've been part of my team over the years. So I'm not going to go through each one of your contributions, but you know who you are. So I was bored silly in high school. And I said, there's got to be a better way to teach. So when I began as an English teacher in a private school in my hometown, I one rainy day took the kids out. Oops, there goes my wife. She's actually heard this story. And I was teaching a short story called To Build a Fire. I waited till a rainy day in the winter and I took the kids out in the backyard and set them up in teams of 3, and they were to build a fire. And if they were lucky enough to get a fire built, I put it out. And that was the start of my gonna do experiential education. And the short story on AEE is that when I was in the Army, stationed in Alaska, which is better than Korea, I'll tell you, Jim. I got an article from my oldest sister on a fellow named Kurt Hahn, sent to me by her, said my most unforgettable character. I applied for a job at Colorado Outward Bound. After I got out of the Army, I went down and interviewed and started work there in 1966. And Perry also worked for Outward Bound on her own and with me for several years. My signature experience, probably 2 signature experiences. One was at University of New Hampshire, because I took this theme of it's for us to ignite the flame and for others to keep it alive. And I said, no, I want to keep it alive. So I worked with a colleague to start a program in experiential education, master's degree, called Live, Learn, and Teach. And we made a documentary out of that. And this is where Ron Gager comes in with ideas. He and Murray Durst helped to fund this. And we got a consortium of experiential educators together. And then I was the convener of the 79 conference in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Bob was president at that time. I was vice president. And the signature moment at that AEE conference was Jolene Unsold doing the keynote talk. And the morning after, we went out to the beach because it was 1979. And somehow or the other, I got inspired to bring everybody out there. And the sun came up and I said, say the name of somebody you've lost. 200 people started shouting names. And that's experience has never left me. That's my signature moment with AEE, other than accreditation standards and so forth. Went on to do various things, president of Sterling College for 10 years, now retired, happily living in a retirement home and teaching courses for a continuing education program here at Dartmouth. And we're happy.
Thank you so much, Jed. Appreciate that. So I did have a very full schedule laid out with lots of questions to ask, which everyone had beforehand, which is lovely. But I wanted to make sure that we honor everybody's time because I know it's everyone's really busy, especially in the springtime with teachers winding up school and professors grading and facilitators training and all kinds of great stuff. I wanted to know if there were any questions from any of our attendees here this evening for our folks. If you have one, you can put it in the chat or feel free to unmute and ask. I know that we have a wide range of people here who have a lot of different experiences with the beginnings of AEE, and if you have a question, please feel free to ask. If not, I will ask some of the ones we had saved up.
I want to hear from more people.
So one of the questions that we had that I posed is, and I think Dick, you definitely hit on this, but what were some of the hopes for the experiential education field in the 70s and when AE was started? What were some of the things that you were hoping to accomplish during that time? You're muted.
Into that, I was personally and professionally in need of a good body of literature. This was one of the reasons we had difficulties at the university. What's your text? Well, there wasn't a text. There were a few good articles sort of photocopied out of the Journal of Experiential Education, but it wasn't clear in the early days that that was peer reviewed in the way that the academics understood that. So I was hoping for a body of literature and a structure that promoted and encouraged research into the nature and workings of experiential ed.
Something that I alluded to earlier, and I wrote an article for the journal, I guess, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, called Closed Classrooms, High Mountains and Strange Lands. And of all the things that I've written over the years, that's probably had, it stuck with me and stuck with a number of other people. And that was, how do we broaden the scope from the high mountains into the international, intercultural kind of an arena, and how do we get out of the closed classrooms? And I think that, as I kind of indicated, has been one of my major regrets, and that is that I think as I look at schools, as I look at universities, it's still we're on the periphery if we're still there. And so many of the programs that Bert and I were involved in, Bert helped us found a teacher ed program that was quite exceptional called Probe, and got a lot of press and a lot of good experience, disappeared without a whimper. And so it's that kind of thing that I think my hope and regrets.
Piggybacking on that, there's the concern that I had during the years of being an instructor when Outward Bound was offering everybody 2 or 3 courses a year was the uncertainty of life as an outdoor instructor, and the fact that we were being there, it wasn't possible to pay us enough. We couldn't work enough to make a living. It was more of a lifestyle than a profession, when many of us wished that we could make it in a profession. And the big whammy came for me when I realized that because we weren't organized and there was no way we could speak with a single voice, was when Lloyd's of London dropped the insurance for almost a year for many, if not all, of our programs. And a lot of us were very concerned that we were running these courses in the colleges and the private schools where we were working with no insurance. And clearly that wasn't a sustainable thing. So my hope was to create a professional organization that could actually look out for the interests of both the instructors and our individual programs.
Yeah, I just want to say for me in the late 70s, it was like getting it to be more of a mainstream, accepted, funded, getting what we needed to fund programs that were inside. And again, like many of you in the classroom, for me in those days, it was therapeutic. And today when I work in more corporate settings, but when I look at where we were in the 70s and I see where we are today, although there's been a little bit of a backstep since COVID, and at least in my experience, and a few other things have caused, I have been able to run some highly experiential programs that I never could have done back in the 70s. So I know there's a feeling of we didn't quite get where we wanted to go that I'm hearing, but I kind of think we've had a big impact as I look from my lens on what I've been able to do as a business professional for the last 50 years. So, and I thank many of the faces I see around here because you are my gatekeepers. So. But yeah, it was not mainstream. We were on the fringe. We were a bunch of hippies that didn't want to really work. And I don't think that's viewed anymore like that.
I think it's important to note too, that in the 70s, we were just starting to recognize the importance of reflection. Prior to that, it was let the mountains speak for themselves, as Rusty Bailey's often quoted. And a big part of that speaks to what Bert mentioned, is that I think AEE, when it first formed, did a lot to support the publication of knowledge and the creation of a professional body of knowledge, one of the principal indicators of what a profession is. And so that's what I think was happening, that was critically important to moving the profession forward. And AEE had a lot to do with that. Thanks.
I want to jump in and ask Mike Gass, whose face I now see. I just brought my grandson home from Ogden, Utah, where he was in a therapeutic training program. And we all think St. Michael deserves an awful lot for all he's done with the whole therapeutic realm. And on a personal level, as a grandfather, thank you, Mike. Take a bow, say something, please.
Let me quickly jump in and say, I didn't want to go on and on, but Mike and I had a wonderful year of developing the accreditation standards for adventure programs. And then he went on to add the therapeutic aspect to that. So thanks for that, Mike. And I still love working with you guys at UNH.
Well, I couldn't do it without my co-partner, Anita Tucker, who we've been able to put some great things together. And what I found is that anything I've done in the field has been done because I had a partnership with many of the people on this slide. So if I wanted to work on therapeutic technique, I'd go to Tony Alvarez. If I wanted to go work on accreditation, I'd go to Jed Williamson. So if I want to do great stuff with substance abuse, Mary Ann Skippa stands out for me. So each of you has a story in my life and has allowed me to grow in a way that I never could have. So I'm very thankful to all the squares that are here right now. There is not a day that I go by where I speak to one of you, and that's what really makes my work valuable.
Thanks, Mike. And I think we're going to hear more from Mike during the 80s edition, which is next month. I so appreciate that we had so many people excited to be part of this series. And so having 10 panelists maybe per session may be too many. We might have to figure out, but I do think this is something that we can continue into the future. And speaking of the future, just in our last couple minutes for our panelists, what do you see for the next 15 to 20 years or the next 5 years for experiential education? What do you see for the future?
Well, that's a big question. My commitment as an educator, whether it was with Outward Bound or, as a college professor, has been to create, stimulate agents of change, people who would go back into their communities and implement new ways of acting and looking at things and helping to change the way things happen. And I think that's the ongoing commitment that we need to have.
I agree, Rick. I just wish that Arthur had been able to jump in at 7:45, Arthur Conquest, who is the voice of our failure to deal with the minority situation in AEE. And he has a lot to say about it. We're in correspondence on a regular basis. So I'll get him to weigh in.
Good.
Thanks, Jed.
So I think
hate to
that's
say
the
it.
direction that I think we need to really focus is on the diversity and inclusion, beginning with ourselves and moving forward out into the world. And I think the last few years have been difficult in many other ways with issues that I'm finding like a few steps backwards, maybe in terms of what we've been allowed to do, issues with insurance. And so I think there's a lot of little things that need to be worked through. And I think we can just learn from the things we've done in our past to help us move into the future. But I think the groundwork for some of those directions exists already. We earlier, before the group came on, we talked about Nina's work and that what you guys are all doing to move that forward. So I think we have the seeds of what we need to nurture now and just keep the energy, keep the fire going.
I would agree. And not necessarily labeled as experiential education is a lot of the work in service learning that is strongly associated with non-military national service. And the National Youth Leadership Council, which is my home base for the last 30 years, has been very strong on creating not only a knowledge base, but a legislative base for this kind of effort. AmeriCorps, for example, was something that grew out of the shared work of several people that worked very closely with NYLC, my organization. And so there's a way to go on this that I think is emerging as far as experiential learning, especially as it relates to giving and contribution, which people are hungry for. Young people, older people, all of us. We want to exercise our lives as lives of significance.
I think Jed wants us to read the book.
Jed's holding up a book, Bachelors of Citizenship, if you didn't
Yeah,
know.
Jim, absolutely. My brother-in-law wrote this book. He's pushing for national service, and he's got a lot of ears in Washington. I'll send you the info on this.
Thank you. Thank you.
Absolutely essential.
There's legislation pending right now. Watch for it to bring service learning into the mainstream of public education, and a lot of erstwhile very stodgy traditional education organizations are discovering this because young people want to make a contribution, and to do it in an organized and orchestrated way with discipline through experiential education is a good pathway. And people are discovering that.
Awesome. That's great information. Thank you, Jim. It is 8:02. I know that here in the Eastern time zone, it's 8:02, 2 minutes after the hour. And I know that many people have different things to do, but I am happy to stay on and continue chatting. Anna has put into the chat information about our next Circle Up series, which will be the 80s edition. You can hang out and out in that one and see what happened in AE during the 1980s. And then each additional month is the next generation up until October when we have our time warp. And then November when we have our 50th conference. So information for the 50th conference is being put on the website. Lots of great stuff happening around that. We're trying to get a lot of people there and a lot of these people that are on with us today there to help us out and learn about our history and learn from our history. So look for more conference information coming soon. Registration for that will open in July, and it's in Black Mountain, North Carolina, which is a beautiful, beautiful place. So I encourage you all to attend and take a look at that. And if you need to drop off, totally understand. If you'd like to stay on, we can continue chatting. And if any of the participants have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or just speak up, because I know we have a lot of knowledge here.
You did a great job, Sherry. Thank you.
Thank you, Jed. And thank you so much to our panelists. It was wonderful to meet you all. Again, I feel very, very honored to be here with you all, and thank you all for joining us. And again, feel free to stay on and chat.
Operational definition of herding cats.
You know, I thought that maybe a little bit, and I did have an ambitious schedule set up for us, and I thought maybe it wouldn't happen, but I do, you know, I learned from this experience, and I'll take it into the next one. So. David, I know you put a question in the chat. Did you want to ask a little more in depth of any of our panelists?
Oh, I think that there's so much hurting in the world right now. And it's always seemed to me that experiential ed on a micro level can do a great deal of healing and connecting people who otherwise would not be in the same space, finding common humanity. And I'm just wondering if there's anything we can do in the macro level. Is there, what can experiential ed do in the face of this terrible polarization in this country, the climate catastrophes that we're facing, and now, of course, we have this this tragic war which may spread, and we have so many good people and so many good ideas and so much good energy, and I just wonder what others think can be the role of experiential education in addressing those problems.
One thing is getting people out in nature where they can encounter themselves in relationship to the natural world. We all need that to save our existence on this planet and to coalesce people's energy to accomplish some of the things we need to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Just one quick additional note. At the conference that was held in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin in the late, early 1980s, several organizations came together around a shared statement, and they were the major college level as well as AEE and younger organizations, dealing with younger people around teaching and learning and addressing some of the issues of the time. And then there was a publication that came out of that was endorsed by over 50 separate educational organizations. Take a look at it. It's called Combining Service and Learning, a resource book for community and public service. Those entities, those organizations are hungry for what AEE can provide them.
Yeah. Yeah, and Jim, that was, of course, the first time that you and I met with our families and our kids. And I want to commend Jim for working on the legislative side, which is a place that often we as experiential educators shy away from, and we do the practical field work and don't apply what we know at a deep level to bring to the public square and advocate for the kind of legislation that can make a difference. So, and I really want to tip my hat to Jim for laboring in the vineyard for decades on that front. So thank you, Jim.
Right, and that's what I was thinking before too, David, when we were chatting. It's about getting our voices heard, not just in the circles that want to hear our voice, but advocating for moving the kind of work that we do into the places that need it the most. And I have to say, Rick, my experience during COVID was people did start to understand the value of being in nature, getting outdoors. And I know where I live here in Northern Virginia, the DC area, it's kind of a drag because some of my favorite secret spots aren't secret anymore. So I got to share them with people. But I think what I'm finding is there's more acceptance and interest and willingness to want to incorporate those things that we've known for 50 years are so important for us to be doing as a way to heal ourselves and the planet. So, I mean, I think we have what we need. We just need to keep the energy behind it moving and maybe move it faster.
This can be done in the cities as well as out in the wilderness.
Yeah, for sure.
Lots of parks and resource areas all around us every day.
Yeah.
I think
Oops.
Simon, you're breaking up.
Yeah, I'm on a high.
Try turning off your video and we might be able to hear you better.
Okay. All right, so what I'm saying is I don't think the movement is taken seriously because we failed to do two things. And I think the association of those two things. One is collect a body of knowledge that clearly identifies our added value proposition world, because too many other movements have taken the word experiential and made it theirs. The second thing I think we need to do is to look at what's inside of the black box of what we do. E-word 1983, it's like what we do is like electricity. You flip a switch and something good comes out the other end, but we really don't know how it happens. And if we knew that in more detail, if we had the research to state that, we could then clearly communicate that. So I think those two things need to happen before we can do greater good, because I don't think we collectively are taken as seriously as we ought to be. Now, that's controversial. Sorry about that.
I agree.
Thank you.
So for me, as someone who's, I've been working in experiential education for a long time without knowing that that's what I was doing. and I'm working in an area, in a place in the country that experiential education doesn't mean anything when I say it to educators here in my area of the world. So I'm finding that I need to take what I know about experiential education and kind of package it differently, and kind of sell it that way. I've landed on kind of skills of facilitation, which everyone needs, regardless of what you do. But I think it's interesting that you say, Simon, that we haven't kind of claimed that role of experiential education and helped people see how important it is. But I think I work a lot in K through 12 education, and I see that in the curriculum, they're doing exactly that. They're asking teachers to have experiences in the classroom and to help their students reflect about those and learn from them. They don't call it experiential education, but it's deeply embedded in the K through 12 curriculum in every subject area now. So it's interesting because I wonder how much effect we've had without really realizing that we've had it.
Agree. Yep.
So I was a very late comer to this meeting. So I apologize, but I was glad to find all of you still here hanging out at the end of this. And I'm trying to pick up the gist of what you're talking about, but a couple things came to mind with the last few people who commented. And one was that just earlier today to our listserv, I sent out, so I'm with a master's in experiential ed at Minnesota State Mankato. I sent out to our listserv a job posting for an assistant director of experiential education. And when I saw the title, it's like, awesome, because I kind of collect these when I find job postings that specifically state experiential education in them, that they're sort of far and few between sometimes. But what it actually was assistant director in career development at a university. And it was mostly going to be focused on internships. Well, internships are a slice of experiential education, but not the whole picture of how we normally define that. Also here at our university, we are looking at a new mission statement for the entire university. And a couple of statements have been thrown out there. And one of them begins with, we provide students with experiential learning, comma, and then some other things. Awesome. But I happen to know that was influenced by the dean of the College of Business here, who is strictly looking at it as internships and nothing else. So there are some concerns with that, with grabbing onto that term without maybe not really understanding the breadth of all that it can be or could be.
And I think, like Simon said, that has happened in a lot of different places. And I think those are places where our voice needs to help to educate and help people see the difference. I think someone said earlier too, the big difference too, where we've come from is just the power of packaging the experience with reflection, the front loading, and just very intentional in how it's designed.
Is there anyone in the room who has insight into some of the early beginnings back in the 1970s when AEE and NSEE parted ways? I thought that was a common group of people at the beginning. Does anyone have any insight on that?
Well, I was there when we decided to open up a conversation, and there were several joint documents produced. And then the big outcome was a resource book called Combining Service and Learning, put together by NSIEE, that includes a large number of AEE people and programs. And so that was in the early 90s that book was published. It's an anthology, and I think it should be online.
Can you say that title again?
It's entitled Combining Service and Learning, Resource Book for Community and Public Service. And it's the publishing organization is NSIEE, the National Society for Internships and Experiential Education. And it includes over 50 separate organizations who have endorsed this. And the center of it is what I would see is high quality experiential education in terms of the theory behind it. So it should be online. Obviously, it's pretty hefty in the book form.
Thank you so much, Marianne. It was great to have you here. And we'll see you for the 80s, right? Awesome. Julie, were you talking about the National Society for Experiential Education? The NSE?
Yes, I was. Yep. NSCE.
Right.
So
thank you for being here.
And yeah, and AEE people were very much involved in the crafting of the initial resource book, and their niche is around the research side, though. You know, so sometimes it gets a little dry to wade into these waters, and yet it's necessary because there needs to be there is evidence out there for what we do. It's a matter, and bringing it to the surface through quality research methodology is not a bad thing. It's a good thing.
So Jim, this is maybe off topic, but is there a chance that you presented a session years ago on judgment, where you used a series of dominoes that you set up around a screen? Does that ring a bell?
It sounds really good, but I had nothing to do with it.
That wasn't you? Okay. I thought it might have been you. All right, no problem.
But do you remember Jasper Hunt at Mankato?
Oh, yes, I know Jasper. Yeah.
Jasper is a good ally for you. And also Governor Walz was a student in some of Jasper's classes here in Minnesota. Yes.
Yes, he is. Tim Walz gave us a comment that we have on our website we have a website where we have alumni testimonials. So he's on that for sure. And,
good.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
You're way ahead of me on that one.
Yeah, the domino thing might have been Jim Raffin. Does that ring a bell?
Yes, and did he have a connection with, was it Outward Bound?
He was
I couldn't hear you, Simon. You're
he was
breaking
at
up.
Queen's Uni with Bert Horwood.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know why I'm having problems with my feed today.
There's also a book that was put together. It's a little old. It was put together by Dick Kraft. It's a 1980s book, Experiential Education and the Schools by Kraft, and I helped out a little bit. So it includes a good mix of program models and organizations that are not AEE, but are experiential in their grounding. Experiential Education in the Schools, edited by Richard J. Kraft.
Let's be clear that there isn't any audience that is susceptible to being engaged in experiential learning. And whether this is institutions, corporations, local parent-teacher organizations, and that it's not exclusive to any single endeavor.
I agree. But I would counter a little bit, though, that there is a growing research base around practices that do better than others. You know, the idea of learning is thinking about experience. We remember that maxim. The notion of bringing learning into the realm of theory, and we can. It's there for us. But sometimes it gets lost, or it is not given the credence it deserves.
Thank
I
you
gotta
so
go.
much, Simon. Thank you, David. It was great to see your face. We'll get that meeting set up.
Good. Looking forward to it. Thanks.
Awesome.
I'm going to sign off as well. All the best to everybody. Thanks so much for organizing.
Oh, Jim, thank you so
Very.
much for being here. It was great. Yeah, I really appreciate it. And we'll make more space next time. Definitely.
Thanks.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Rick.
Looking forward to June.
Yeah. Yeah, it's great. Awesome.
I'll plan on being here for the 80s and I'll be on time next time. Good to
No
see
problem,
you, Sherry.
Julie.
Yeah, we'll
Good
see
to
you next time.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Thanks, Lucinda.